today to my fourth public lecture on my arcological design series. Today's lecture is going to be called Arcology and Integrative Science, and it is perhaps the greatest synthesis of the field, if you can call it that, as a science since Solari passed away. And his illustrations, which made him famous in cliff sides, massive habitats of self-contained society, went far beyond the actual material and intellectual and social and societal and architectural capacities of actually existing civilization up until that point, and indeed to date as well, of course. And this is perhaps asking a lot of any field of study to both act as a perfect mirror to a civilization or set of civilizations, or a species indeed, and also scientifically assess a realistic new paradigm. Unfortunately, particularly with regards to the all-encompassing nature of real arcological proliferation, humanity has, of course, been totally incapable of manifesting such things as arcologies to date. History has been, as stated in a previous section, a series of wars. This reality could be given considerable attention and still not be done complete justice, and is perhaps understated in the overall acceptance of, in conversation regarding arcology. Arcology is, of course, limited perhaps primarily by the actual beings performing its proliferation after all. In humans, the primary limitations seem to be both emotional as well as attentional. As we see in cases of severe ADHD, a full personality may be present with quite positive personal goals, like ecological stewardship or regenerative agriculture specifically, but without the actual capability and intent to perform the work or have the work performed for them, their desires are ineffectual. Worse, what we might consider positive interpersonal arcological goals seem to be manifestly unpopular amongst most people currently. So we indeed don't just see some inability, we have intentionally, or at least extrinsically bad, default behavioral networks to work from in the wider population. Perhaps many of the underlying but largely unspoken problems in having humans build complete arcologies are indeed serious problems, not because they are issues with the underlying architectural and urban science, but because they are issues with the observable average person's normal behavior patterns and social conventions in general. More than simply stating the obvious, we must look at the facts at hand regarding the entities which inevitably construct the arcology, in a manner similar to studying cellular metabolism and composition in organ systems. Cities have to date evolved over large spans of time, generations, expanding outwards from some central nexus of initial population density, not entirely unlike mold, though rather extended in the time dimension, of course, in comparison. Existing cities are notably not centrally planned or even deeply organized like a castle might be, for instance. What we can say about their function is actually limited to a great degree by the secrecy of the economic interactions therein. Many economically critical relationships between individuals specifically and between entities, legally speaking, exist at some level of mutual secrecy. Not every entity has perfect information about every other, even for trivialities often enough. This last point about perfect information is perhaps surprisingly important to consider. The great lossiness, imperfection of knowledge inherent to so much information between any given nodal actors is a result of so many human conventions as well as emotional and attentional limitations. Designing complex software with this much directly inaccessible between key components would largely be impossible, though perhaps we do see this subconsciously manifested in the practices of object-oriented programming. The irrationality sometimes evident there is similar to the irrationality more broadly of, for instance, the drawdown of ecological resources beyond carrying capacity by some given urban system or systems. Thus, we come back again to the central impacts of cognitive loading, Dunbar's number, on city organization. While local law and jurisprudence is indeed tangible to those who interact with it, we must also understand it practically and functionally in order to expand it. What we do know for tractable purposes, given some local town, is who currently owns what segment in a rough 2D grid of some urban region, which is only truly defined piecemeal at the scope of whatever has so far occurred between people legally. Other than that, we generally have some modified grid-type record of the previous people who owned something there. But this historical record is rarely completely ontologically or even practically consistent beyond a limited time period and for a limited cultural section slice. In terms of its literal digital twin or virtually interactive extents, the computer age has allowed for some progress to be made, largely dependent on the local area in question. Families come and go, relationships begin and end, people die, new people are born. Jurisdictions come into being, are experienced for a time, then are altered beyond recognition by the vicissitudes of history. What has not occurred, perhaps most importantly for the sake of an arcological build-out in a wider historical context, is some actual, well-defined existential guarantee by an urban area to the individuals within it. Something like, provide us with your best self according to you, and you can have some level of equivalent access to the urban area and its products. Naturally, this definition can be expanded upon by the culture that specifically deals with what this means for it or for them. Crucially, we can see this explication of mutual assurances as the bedrock which society itself emerges from, and which history is the larger reference frame of. For working purposes, we'll consider how much of the modern world behaves and what assurances it provides for what behaviors. Generally, an urban area offers access to a market of potential options, but an urban area does not guarantee anything based upon formally stated definitions, which are almost universally thought to be fair and constitutive. To even do so in the first place would seem to require the explication of a great many things. Both formal definitions of society, which are largely considered philosophical today, as well as the kinds of secret information between actors, which exist implicitly considering the practical cognitive limitations as well as tendencies of existing organized social structures. Suffice it to say, arcology, if actually realized today, would seem to demand greater depths of urban explication than perhaps has even been considered before. It's not merely a matter of having Bechtel come crank us out a habitat. Arcology, practically, is a matter of how groups of individuals relate to history and the capability level they actually possess to do such things as self-actualization and the mutual elevation of one another within real physical limitations and other practically existing realities. Even if the collective understanding of the generically defined convolutional process of historical becoming exists in some partly definable way, it is obviously so large in terms of representational complexity that it would be natural to reduce its scope to some well-defined minima. This minima has practically been extremely small for almost all cities to date, lacking the aforementioned self-interaction data and even goals more generally at all. Without actual articulable goals to define the operational parameters of an urban area, that urban area is like a mayfly in the scheme of things. Perhaps a large number of people, millions of people, stake some claim during their lives in that urban area, or make some noteworthy accomplishments within its boundaries, however loosely defined those boundaries are. Ultimately, all those people's activity is incidental at best to the area. Nothing truly intentional was ever even attempted within those mutually realized conceptual boundaries and within those urban limits. And here we begin to confront the potentially uncomfortable defining constructs which would actually constitute an urban framework so rigorous as one which could provably feed its own population while leaving the surrounding environment entirely alone, and do so on a permanent basis for a large population. For a start, such a population would at least initially need to be prepared to eat, for the most part, rather intentionally, and by extension live rather intentionally compared to individuals today. Accounting for the total closure of a real population's lifetime diets is not a trivial task at all. There is much more to arcology than simply diet. Even if diet is a physically indispensable set of components to any human arcological design. That isn't to say that the diet couldn't be arbitrarily varied and arbitrarily high quality. These things would be a science of mutual benefit, a new type of social system. For technical purposes, we can begin with an initial simulation planning phase in which the architectural structure modeling is given top priority, followed by interior decoration and people modeling, with interior decoration and detailed people modeling considered lower priority. Eventually, the goal is to establish models which are accurately representative of the lived experience of an arcology's inhabitants, in order to visualize the interior arcology at a useful level of coarseness. This includes visualizing in a game engine food consumption of the entire population through NPCs eating at tables, and by ongoing recording of walking and transit distances between their homes and their shared cafe spaces. Additionally, we may analyze food production by following the various residents acting as greenhouse operators, closed-loop farmers, during their daily routines. The first set of architecture-related mathematical requirements includes calculations for cafe sizes, total greenhouse areas, and total residential areas, while the first set of architecture initial 3D modeling requirements, similar to the Mars colony simulation, involves modeling areas with geometric primitives. At a minimum, we model a cafe for 150 people eating a few meals a day on average, the greenhouse areas and the residential areas. In physical agricultural terms, the Haber process may be used to produce ammonia, bypassing conventional syngas by generating hydrogen via water splitting electrolysis. This hydrogen reacts with iron under high pressures and temperatures to produce ammonia for food production. The initial 3D modeling requirements for fertilizer technology encompass a factory lab for water splitting, hydrogen capture, and the Haber process itself, and its electrolysis machinery. For electrical demand, baseload power should primarily come from geothermal energy due to its extreme longevity and low moving part maintenance profile, which gives it a highly competitive overall intensity. While solar panels and other energy gradient technologies can be explored, the complex supply chain required to support roughly 30-year solar panel lifespans must be exhaustively accounted for before declaring any solar solution arcologically optimized, given the significant rare earth mining that such a supply chain entails just for a start. For a biological comparison, plant leaves may be viewed as solar panels which regenerate themselves through plant reproduction and also enrich the soil via decay processes. From an arcological perspective, leaves are far more sophisticated than conventional solar panels. Leaves are almost effortless to initiate a basic unit of from a literal materials and supply chain perspective, as well as maintain indefinitely via reproduction and potentially total closure. Baseload electrical energy storage may employ gravity batteries, which lift a given tonnage of weights during periods of excess geothermal output and lock them in place when production falls. The weights are then released to drive electricity generation as part of a baseload operation. The initial 3D modeling requirements for baseload power include the geothermal energy assembly and surrounding equipment such as steam turbines, weights of various sizes based on baseload storage and release needs, the lifting apparatus, and the electric motors which capture and deliver power. And in an initial intensity study of the entire arcological assemblage after build-out, watt hours may be used as a primary comparison factor as per the MCS to estimate the ultimate energy intensity required for the build-out. The payback total expressed as a percentage of the initial intensity can be used to delineate the energy payback by subtracting a given time period of power cycling that supports the resident population from the initial intensity within the closed system. The payback total calculation should be rigorously supported by the food production tonnage within the arcology and the external energy required to match that production. In all likelihood, the energy intensity of a given arcological build-out will be dominated by a few major components such as excavation and site preparation, construction of the architecture itself, and interior components such as water storage and power generation facilities, while smaller percentages will predominate thereafter. For a given initial study, two categories of controlled ecological life support systems, CELSS, may be considered. The primary focus will be large-scale indoor controlled food production using ammonia fertilizers and sunlight. And the second category will be conventional ecosystems such as a woodland with a complete soil ecology. These categories are studied separately due to their integration complexity and the comparatively low production levels of natural local ecologies. The use of ammonia fertilizers is pragmatic as modern society depends on this procedure for scalable, reliable food production, but it does not exempt the primary CELSS category from full cycle analysis, which will account for waste recycling, biological conversion upstream, and the production soil ecology. Technically accurate food production spaces will be prioritized. In the MCS, they were shown as translucent green rectangular volumes stacked vertically. However, in this new program, the spaces are rendered as large integrated greenhouses with detailed architectural structures and some basic texturing to convey the idea without modeling specific vegetation due to the extreme dimensions of technically accurate arcological food production systems. Because duration, the expected functional lifetime of the assemblage, is paramount, construction material should be as long-lasting as possible. Contemporary construction techniques and technologies in general often rely on short-lived and non-regenerative materials such as glue and tape, whereas using existing geotechnical features such as cliff sides may yield the longest duration city profiles per initial intensity, as Saleri himself became famous for illustrating in numerous arcology drawings. Representing cafe areas sized to meet the arcology's real food and population requirements is also naturally a top priority. The base population size factor is 150 people, taken to be the socio-ecological basic group, and calculations are performed for 150 adults to limit computational complexity and allow for sufficient simulation granularity.